It's probably safe to say that most people do not like rules. We may appreciate them. I mean, they often exist to keep us safe, and imagining a world without them is a bit unsettling. But very few of us appreciate being told what to do and how to act, especially when we think the rules are not fair. Now, let's think about international trade. There is agreement between countries that some rules are needed. But let's think of how many countries there are in the world. Having trouble remembering? There are 196 countries. Now think of all the diversity that exists within these countries and between them. Now think of how challenging it must be to bring these countries together to agree on a set of rules. In this lecture, we're going to look at the rules countries have managed to agree on through the WTO. The member governments of the World Trade Organization, or the WTO, have agreed upon a set of key principles, which are called trade rules. These rules are the points on which member governments agree. Let's take a look at these one by one. First, member countries of the WTO agree to the principles of liberalization. This means they consider free trade the best way to create the highest overall welfare because it encourages an efficient division of labor. This means they agree to work towards the elimination of subsidies and equal treatment of domestically produced products and imported goods and services. To say it in a bit of a different way, liberalization means that national products and products from other countries should be treated the same. So no preference given to national products. This also means that under the WTO rules, member countries are supposed to reduce subsidies. Now, subsidies are a form of financial aid or support given to an economic sector or a business, and sometimes even individuals, with the aim of promoting and supporting a particular policy. The second point is that individual countries have to lower custom tariffs. These are taxes applied to goods that cross national borders. Third, countries have agreed to procedures for settling disputes that come up regarding trade. Fourth, there is agreement that developing countries can receive some special treatment. Finally, member countries must meet certain requirements to make their trade policies transparent. Now that we know the 5 basic principles of WTO membership, let's turn our attention to agriculture. To do that, we have to look back in time. Now, before the WTO, there was the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Let's call that the GATT. The GATT, which took effect in 1948, aimed to promote the reduction of tariffs and other trade barriers. The original GATT is still in effect under the WTO framework, but it was modified in 1994. Agricultural trade was included in the original GATT, but it did not receive explicit attention, and the agreements that did exist contained several loopholes. For example, the agreements permitted the use of non-tariff measures. These are barriers to trade that restrict imports, but are not tax barriers, so they include things like import quotas and subsidies. The result was that agricultural trade came under political influence, especially due to the use of export subsidies. The GATT and the WTO call their negotiations rounds, and between 1986 and 1994, the GATT had a long negotiation called the Uruguay Round. The Uruguay Round led to the first agreement, or set of rules, dedicated to agriculture. This agreement is called the Agreement on Agriculture, and it came into force with the launch of the WTO on the 1st of January 1995. I guess I don't need to tell you that the Agreement on Agriculture is rather complex, but that's not a good reason to ignore it. To better understand the Agreement on Agriculture, we can take a look at the 3 pillars: domestic support, market access, and export subsidies. Domestic support refers to support countries provide to the agricultural production that takes place in their own countries. Under the Agreement on Agriculture, all domestic support for agricultural producers is subject to rules. To make sense of the types of domestic support, the WTO created a classification system organized around 3 boxes. We can think of the boxes as traffic lights, very complicated traffic lights. Moving on to Pillar 2, market access. This pillar is concerned with reducing barriers to trade by WTO members. Developed and developing countries have separate reduction targets. The least developed countries are exempt from tariff reductions, but they are expected to shift their non-tariff barriers, so the types of barriers that are not tax-based, to tariffs. This will then allow for the WTO to calculate the maximum level of tariffs, or taxes. From there, they can start to decrease the taxes. The third pillar of the Agreement on Agriculture is export subsidies. Developed and developing countries have to reduce export subsidies according to negotiated targets and timelines. So, in this lecture, we've looked at the 5 key principles of the WTO and the 3 pillars on the Agreement on Agriculture. Again, the 5 principles of the WTO are liberalization, lower custom tariffs, settling disputes, special treatment for developing countries, and transparent trade policies. The 3 pillars for the Agreement on Agriculture are domestic support, market access, and export subsidies. Great. We're a step closer to understanding the role of the World Trade Organization for food and agriculture, and food access, more importantly. And we're closer to identifying different roles and positions of international trade for food access. I have just one more thing to tell you. Remember how I explained that negotiations are called rounds in the WTO? Well, the current round is called the Doha Development Round, and yes, it's about development. This round has been ongoing since November 2001, and it's not clear how the negotiations will end, if they will end at all. The agreements broke down in July 2008, mainly over disagreements concerning agriculture. Until those disagreements are addressed, the Agreement on Agriculture is what we have. But this raises an important question: how to organize international trade and secure food access if the WTO is not working effectively. Whatever the international community decides, it will have a big impact on the way food is traded and, in turn, on how people access food.